Hello and welcome to Daily Dose Radio, a 5-minute-a-day podcast studying the Psalms verse by verse, recorded here in the dining room of the Bible Bistro, located in Sharonville, Ohio. Hey there, friend. You found it. This is Daily Dose Radio here in the Bible Bistro. This is your home for 5 minutes a day, 5-day a week, studying the Psalms verse by verse, podcasting. You're going to find it right here in the Bible Bistro. It's the only place. Daily Dose Radio, right here in the Bible Bistro. And man, have we got a good one this week. Oh my goodness. We're going to study Psalm 82. And Psalm 82 is only 8 verses. But the thing that's really cool about Psalm 82 is that it follows Psalm 81. So we know that there's this wonderful design in the arrangement, not only of each individual psalm, how they appear in the Psalter, in the arrangement of each psalm to its neighbor, the one before and the one that comes after. And in large groups. For example, this is another Psalm of Asaph. Well, we've been studying Psalms of Asaph since Psalm 73, so there's a larger group there. But this psalm comes after 81, and 81, you remember that we talked about God's song. He was singing a song to the people as they were gathering for worship on a feast day, and he talks about redemption, he talks about his covenant, he talks about his judgment, he asks a question, if only you had, so judgment is part of the theme here. And now today we come to 82, and we begin with these words, God stands in the congregation of the mighty. So he's going to stand, he's going to talk about judgment. That's a theme of this 82nd Psalm. And we ended with God saying, how come you couldn't judge yourselves? And if you only had, I would have blessed you. So now we come to 82, and we're really going to put a fine point now on this idea of judgment. The actual word judgment occurs 4 times in 8 verses. So it is a strong theme in this particular psalm. And what we're going to learn about judgment is he's going to show us how to judge. He said, if you had only, now he's going to say, okay, here's how you do it. We're going to talk about that this week, learning to judge. This is a Psalm of Asaph. That's all that we have here as far as an introduction goes, just a Psalm of Asaph. Today I'm going to treat verses 1 and 2, so let me read those for us. God stands in the congregation of the mighty. He judges among the gods. How long will you judge unjustly and accept the persons of the wicked? All right, so that's verses 1 and 2. So we had God standing in the congregation of the mighty last time, didn't we? When the Lord begins speaking there in verse 6 in Psalm 81, I removed his shoulder from the burden, his hands were delivered from the pots. You called in trouble, and I delivered you. I answered you in the secret place of thunder. So he begins his monologue, speaking to them about what he's done for them there in 81, 5 or 6 and 7. And now we come here to 82, and the psalmist Asaph says, God stands in the congregation of the mighty. He judges among the gods. Now, let me, and you'll notice that King James has that smaller case G. Let me just give you my translation of that first verse. Here it is. God stands to plead in the congregation of God. In the midst does God judge. So I think sometimes we get carried away with this idea of the people being God, because we have it here in verse 1, translated like that in verse 1, among the gods. And then we have it again down there in verse 6. And I think that sort of, that current sweeps us away because everybody's so excited or so disturbed by that idea. But I think just a careful translation will render something that's a little more sensible. God stands to plead in the congregation of God. He judges in the midst. God does judge. In the midst does God judge. So I think it's very easy for us to get carried away with that idea that, God's judging amongst the gods, that we're the gods somehow. No, we're not. And we'll talk more about that this week as we go forward with the podcast. But you'll notice his question. So Asaph begins here in verse 1. God stands in the congregation. So we know Asaph is speaking. But then verse 2, I think the Lord starts to speak here, and we find out that he is speaking down here in verse 6 when he says, I have said. But in verse 2, we have his question. He always seems to begin with a question, doesn't he? How long will you judge unjustly and accept the persons of the wicked? You see, God is judging, but they're not. He's judging rightly, but apparently the people are not judging rightly. God stands to plead in the congregation. In the midst, does God judge? Why? Because the people of God are not judging rightly. And so he asked the question, how long will you judge unjustly? So we need to learn how to judge. There's a judgment that we need to get. We need to understand how to do it. And so he's going to tell us. Now, tomorrow we'll talk about that. Verses 3 and 4, he gives us the how to judge here. He asks the question, why aren't you judging justly? And then he shows us tomorrow in 3 and 4 how to judge justly. All right, so I hope you'll join me then here on Daily Dose Radio. Thanks for listening to Daily Dose Radio. For more fresh and delicious Bible studies, podcasts, books, and more, check out the Bible Bistro online and on YouTube. Join me again next time for Daily Dose Radio.